You don't know what you don't know, essentially. And when you do know it, you realize it sucks.
Hi everyone, welcome back to this week's episode on Take a Pain Check. I'm excited to have Mackenzie joining me today. Hi Mackenzie, can you give me a brief introduction about yourself? Tell me a little bit about your education, your career, what you've been up to recently.
So I'm Mackenzie. I'm a journalist based in Toronto. Last June, I graduated from Toronto Metropolitan University with a master's in journalism. And since then, I've been working freelance work, and then I also work full time for a magazine as an associate editor. And on my spare time, I like to advocate for people with disabilities in the lupus community. So that's kind of what I do besides writing. And I'm also really into reading and in arts and things like that. So I also have done some freelancing work in art-based publications as well, which is awesome. I graduated from my undergrad at York University in 2021, I believe. So just after COVID. And obviously, so I got my degree, my undergrad degree in film and screenwriting, and that wasn't a totally lucrative job market at the time, obviously. So I had a lot of free time on my hands, and I actually reached out to Lupus Canada, um, basically saying, "Hey, I have lupus, and would you be interested in me writing a story for your monthly newsletter?" Because at that point I was diagnosed and I was reading their monthly newsletter. So it was during COVID. There's not a whole lot to do. And yeah, I sent it to them and they loved it. The response I got back was really positive, and that kind of opened my eyes to writing. The writing stream for me doesn't necessarily have to be, fiction or a screenwriting platform. It can be like old school journalism, op-eds type of writing as well. So that was kind of my approach to journalism. And then once I had that published, I just started reaching out to local newspapers to see if they needed anyone to write some local stories. And I got a job doing that for a bit.
Awesome, and thanks for kind of introducing the topic of lupus because
Yes.
what we will be talking about. So we know you're diagnosed with lupus, but when were you diagnosed and what kind of led you to see a doctor?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed in it would have been the fall of 2017. And essentially prior to that, I would say a year and a half to 2 years prior, so like 2015 to 2016, I was experiencing um just really intense bouts of like joint pain in my hands and my feet. Also getting really painful and strange rashes on my hands, my feet, my face. And I never just kind of put two and two together. They were all kind of sporadic. And at that time, I was working in normal service jobs. So I was on my feet all the time. And I was also, cleaning with harsh chemicals. I was working at a pet store and then at a local grocery store. So it was just a lot of like standing on your feet and stuff. And that's just what I attributed it to. I never really considered that it was something more to be looked at. So, basically, what led me to finally go to the hospital was it was in the summer of 2017. I was sick periodically throughout that time. In the summer, I was having really bad joint pain and kept going to the walk-in or the hospital or my local doctor, and they kept just explaining to me that essentially I had no swelling in my hands. So, and I had no swelling in my feet, so they just said that my hands are just tender or sore and to take like an extra strength Tylenol. And that was kind of it. But things progressed and got worse because I got to the point where I couldn't open like jars. I couldn't, put on buttons on my shirt. I needed my mom's help to like pull up a pair of pants on myself. So it was clearly progressing. And at this point, like we knew I had to go to the doctor. I was also unable to do things that traditionally I could have done and it would have been totally normal for me. Like I couldn't brush my hair anymore or curl it when I was going out. It took a lot out of me to do that, and I'd have to get my mom to do it for me. And so I was losing my sense of dependent independence a lot. Um, so it was around that time we seriously considered going to a doctor just to get a rheumatologist like referral, even if they weren't sure it was that direction. But before that could happen that summer, I went on a camping trip with a couple of my friends. And basically, I experienced one of the worst flare-ups of my life during that time. I developed significant pain on the right side of my lung that made it really difficult for me to breathe, yawn, cough, lie down, stand up. It felt like burning essentially. And I thought maybe I had pneumonia. So when I got back home, my mom and I immediately went to the hospital. And after trial and error of like begging doctors to take me seriously and to listen to me, I finally got an X-ray where they found that I had a hole in my lung that they did further testing on, and it turns out that hole was actually a liquid from pleurisy. So that's when I finally got a referral. And then a few months later, I would say maybe a month and a half, 2 months, I was diagnosed with lupus officially. But I was definitely experiencing symptoms with it for at least 2 years prior to that diagnosis.
Yeah, it sounds like you really experienced different types of symptoms that led to the diagnosis, which made it pretty clear there was no sign of misdiagnosis or anything like that, right?
I wasn't misdiagnosed, but I also um, had like five diagnoses on the table, and they were just like I didn't know I had lupus until my rheumatologist kind of like nonchalantly like puffed it under his breath. Like he pulled out my file, and at this point, I didn't know what I had. I kept asking him like what he thought I had, and he just kept like not answering me or giving me a straight answer, and that was really confusing because like we didn't know why he wasn't telling me. And then he kind of like nonchalantly like pulled out my file and was like, "Oh, Mackenzie, yeah, you're the one with lupus, right? Right?" And me and my mom were like, "Oh, so I do have lupus." And he was like, "Oh yeah, you have it." And I don't know. I know that doctor was seeing a lot of clients at the time, so he's probably just overwhelmed, but that was not the best way to find out. But at that point, my mom and I were pretty certain I had lupus. I had all of the symptoms, and a couple of weeks prior to that event, a walk-in doctor actually like I went to her just to like see a rash on my hand. It had nothing to do with any of my other symptoms, and she was like, "Oh, you're having problems walking, you're having problems breathing. You have this rash on your face and your hand, like you have all of the symptoms of lupus." And we were like, "Oh." So at that point, we pretty much figured I had it. I just didn't have an official diagnosis until a little bit later.
Okay, that makes sense. And what was your medication journey like?
I was fortunate in that my medication journey was a pretty positive one. I was initially not on anything when before I got diagnosed, and then when I was diagnosed, I was immediately put on, I believe, prednisone, so the steroid, and I was on that pretty much right away. And I was taking, I think, at one point like 8 pills a day, so like four in the morning and four before you go to bed. And once that happened, and I started to kind of get back on my feet and gain mobility and things like that, I moved from prednisone to Plaquenil and Imuran. And so I was diagnosed in 2017. And as of today, so 2016, I'm only on Imuran. So fortunately, my experience has been positive. When I was diagnosed, I would say about 2, 3 months after I had my rheumatologist, I was referred to the lupus clinic at Toronto Western, and I had a specific treatment plan with my doctor there. And it's been wonderful. And I'm really fortunate to have experienced that because I know a lot of people with lupus specifically don't get diagnosed for sometimes years because people just don't understand the disease. They can't always catch all the symptoms, or they don't understand how to treat the illness because it shows up in so many different ways.
In terms of the social support aspect of it, because you talked about the medication, looks like your medication journey was pretty well. Like they were able to find the medication for you. I know a lot of patients like myself who had to go through lots of different medications.
Mm.
But socially, how did you tell people around you that you had lupus?
Yeah, that was definitely one of the more difficult aspects for me. I knew like everyone who was close in my life knew I was sick with something because it was like something I couldn't hide. I was in a wheelchair at one point, so it was something I couldn't hide anymore. I think it was hardest for me to tell like my loved ones and family members because autoimmune illnesses run in my family and we've lost people to autoimmune illnesses. So I think it was harder to acknowledge that with them because I was so young. I was only 19 and um, it kind of was a bitter pill to swallow. With my friends, it was less scary because I felt like I could play it down a little bit more because they didn't totally understand. They just knew I was sick. Whereas with my loved ones, I mean, I had a great aunt who passed away from lupus. So it was something that we all acknowledged was dangerous and scary. In regards to actually knowing other people with similar illnesses or disabilities, I didn't really know anyone who was open about it. I only found out later that they also too had an illness. So at the time, I felt pretty alone because nobody was openly sharing or talking about their difficulties. Um, so I was pretty to myself about it, and I didn't really talk to anyone. And that was definitely a challenge for me just because I felt quite alone. I would say I was mostly just talking to my mom.
So you had a friend in high school who had lupus. What was this interaction like? Like, how did you find out that they had lupus, and what was your initial thought? Like, did you have lupus at the same time as them?
Yeah, so I did have a friend who had lupus, but I only found out like afterwards. He was a mutual friend of mine and he was a couple years younger than me. And just looking at him, like you would have no idea. He was just a normal, average teenage boy, like nothing that, would make you kind of question it. I remember he would sometimes like not be at school for longer periods of time. But again, like I never really thought about it. It was only when I was diagnosed and I told him that I had lupus that he shared with me that he too had it and he was diagnosed when he was really young. And it really impacted him, and he was really sick for a long time. So that to me was crazy because I literally had no idea. And I also didn't know any other men or boys in my life that had lupus. So it was a wild experience.
You talked a little bit about your friend being diagnosed with lupus, but you only knew about this a little bit later on, and kind of knowing that, there are men that do have lupus, but they don't talk about it as much in the public eye or space.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, how did you advocate for yourself and then others living with lupus?
Yeah, that was something I didn't do for, I would say, like the first couple years, just because I was mostly dealing with the actual, I guess, blowback of having it and experiencing everything I did. I felt not confident would be the right word, but I just wasn't really necessarily ready to be like an advocate or share everything I went through. I just kind of wanted to be at peace and kind of do my own thing. It was only, I would say, um, a couple years later where my mom's coworker was diagnosed with lupus, and so was her son, who she had just given birth to, that I realized that having a voice or being more open about it is helpful for other people. Even myself, it would have been helpful for me to be more aware of the support groups and advocacy groups out there. I was aware of them to an extent. I just kind of preferred to keep them at arm's length. Like I knew about the Lupus Canada and Lupus Ontario organizations and support groups. I read the newsletters. I just didn't feel ready to be in an environment where we all kind of shared each other's stories. I just felt kind of shy about it. And it was, I would say, only in the last few years that I've really opened up and wanted to be a part of the community because we all share such similar stories in regards to our diagnosis journeys and the treatments and how we experience life through a disability lupus lens. So, and like I said, also a lot of people in my family have either arthritis or autoimmune illnesses. And then we have a couple of close personal family friends who have lupus as well. Um, and I it was something that I kind of just opened my eyes a little bit because you don't really realize until it's happening to you, and then you kind of notice it everywhere. That's kind of what happened. So that's when I kind of wanted to talk about it with other people in similar situations like myself. I have a family friend who's older than me, I would say by like 20 years, and he has lupus as well. And like I said, I would have never known until my mom kind of said to me, like, oh, he has lupus too. Like, you guys should connect. And although that may sound silly, but really getting to talk to someone who can understand such a specific niche or thing you're also going to, even if it's not exactly similar, just know you're not alone, um, is a really positive experience. So that's when I started being more vocal on platforms about lupus, joining more support groups, speaking with people about it. And also, too, people are just very misinformed about it. They don't understand what it is. Also, people make, comments that aren't the most appropriate because they don't understand. So I think just kind of breaking um, that misunderstanding about what lupus is and what it means to have a disability, because a lot of people just don't understand that because someone doesn't look disabled or they're not perceived as disabled doesn't mean they may not need accessibility or need something that, an able-bodied person would.
That's so interesting that you're kind of mentioning, you were afraid to talk to people or share your story, even like get out there in terms of like sharing your lupus story or meeting other people. Because I think I was the same too. It's not because I entirely didn't want to. I didn't understand the concept of like, why do I have to meet other people with arthritis? Isn't that going to make me sad?
Hmm.
Like, even more
Yeah.
sad than I already am. And I think it's so like, it's really life changing. Like, when you do, it's not that you feel like I don't know. After I met so many people, I'm not like as sad. I feel like if I ever have questions, I can always ask them, and it's just like another resource for me. But I think growing up with it, you and like thinking of the concept of you're gonna meet all these other people with arthritis. I remember I didn't go to arthritis camp because my parents and I were like, why would I want to? Like, it just sounds like I'll be really sad with all these kids.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound happy and exciting. But then when I met so many people, they're like, "Oh my God, we had the best time at arthritis camp. We met like our best friends there." And I was like, "Okay, well, I wish I went." But that meant like I guess that mentality or that mindset growing up, we just didn't have that much like awareness about these things. And if we did, like I already had my misconceptions about it and my own kind of like predisposed thoughts. And so I'm wondering, like, what were some major misconceptions, or what are some major misconceptions that you hear about lupus?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main one is people just don't understand what it is. Like whenever like at this point I'm used to it, so it doesn't bother me as much, but it was really hard for me, I would say the first few years when I was struggling physically, like if I needed to sit down at work or I needed to like go lay down for a moment, if I needed to excuse myself, if I didn't want to go out and drink alcohol with my friends, if something was going on too late for me and I knew that I'd be too tired, it was always kind of the same spiel of me having to re-explain myself in my illness and like what it meant because people don't see it on you, so they can't fully grasp that, like, oh, maybe this person can't do this or won't be able to. So that was something that I really struggled with because for me, having to constantly be like, oh, I can't do this because of lupus, or this is hard for me because of lupus. I need to sit down because of lupus. That was something that really upset me. So for a long time, I just never said anything because it got exhausting. And what kind of broke me out of my shell a little bit was I was so I get handicap parking for my lupus. And a lot of the time, I don't need it because I feel good on that specific day. But because my lungs are affected by my lupus, I have poor breathing pretty much. I don't have the best lung capacity. So when I'm, walking through a parking lot and there's only parking available at the back of the lot, or there's a handicap spot, I'm going to park at handicap because it's easier for me to breathe walking from that spot to the entrance. And I had someone basically harass me at that spot and basically penalize me in front of a whole audience of people, saying that I don't look disabled, that I'm taking that spot away. And that had just happened literally like right after I got diagnosed and almost died. So that was pretty brutal. And ever since that happened, want I wanted to be more of an advocate for disability, specifically invisible illnesses. And I think that's a big misconception, especially people in the autoimmune or invisible disability groups, where like just because people can't physically see that you are experiencing something, are disabled in some capacity, they assume they have the right to judge you. And uh, you know, nobody looks one way when they're disabled. If someone has a heart condition, I can't just look at them and know that they have a heart condition. So it's just these lewd kind of comments where people can be quite rude. A lot of the time, if I'm taking the TTC and I sit one of the blue chairs, which are assigned to people who might be pregnant or have a disability or elderly. I've also had people, make looks at me or roll their eyes or, kind of scoff, make a comment. And it doesn't bother me as much anymore because, it's just the way it is. But um, I think really opening people's eyes to, you can't just look at someone and know what's happening with their body. Um, so that for me is something it's really important for me to talk about and kind of just like, not even like trying to be rude to people, but if someone does make a comment to me, I will say I have a disability and I just kind of leave it at that. I don't have to explain what it is because I used to feel the need to do that. Like I used to like feel like show my medical alert bracelet and be like, I have a disability, like screw you type of thing. Now I'm just kind of like, I have a disability, and I just kind of leave it at that because you don't need to explain yourself. But that's just a huge misconception. I think another big misconception is because lupus is so unknown and there's so many diagnosed symptoms for the diagnosis. People with lupus can have really bad eczema, can lose their hair, have alopecia, they can be wheelchair bound, they can have kidney failure, liver failure, all these issues. I've known people who have lupus in their brain, so it causes them to have seizures. There's no one way to have lupus. So I think that just contributes to the misconceptions of it because even doctors are still puzzled by it. So the most important thing to do is just to advocate for it and say, this disease is quite unknown even still, even though it's relatively new in the medical world, but it really isn't because it's been around for a long time. Um, it's something that does exist, and the people's pain that they experience is very real. So it shouldn't be discredited because someone looks all right. Um, that's just something that I'm very passionate about because almost everyone I've spoken to with lupus has a very similar story about someone basically penalizing or harassing them because they sat down, they took a handicap stall, they took a handicap spot. They used the elevator that was only for people who needed a wheelchair or something like that.
It's so unfortunate that you face things like that, and I think it's the same for me. I kind of just don't care anymore what people say in
Hmm.
terms of even, yeah, on the subway, just sitting on some of those chairs, or even at the airport, sitting on the chairs where there is kind of like a wheelchair sign. And now I've even realized because I used to not do this, but when you go on like the Via Rail or any sort of train, you're able to sit in like a certain section before you board the train so they can help you with your bags. And so
Hmm.
now because I had no idea, I used to struggle before like carrying my bag like onto the train, but now they have like a certain area, like a priority lane where you can sit there and then someone will come and like take you and help you. put your bag on the train. So that's been super helpful for me. And then even for the plane now, there's like the priority boarding for people that have like little kids and stuff like that, or people that need more time. And so I go into that as well. And I feel like before I had no idea of these things, or I just thought, okay, like, should I be using this? I should be if I need to. And when you need those things, you kind of use it. And for me, I haven't needed like a parking pass, but for you, you do. And that's what it is. And I think if people need those resources or need to be sitting there, then they just should. And it shouldn't matter what other people say or think or do. You kind of felt like you needed to explain your disease at the beginning, but then you realized you didn't have to. I feel like that a lot in terms of like school, where I felt like I had to tell every single person, like, this is exactly what's happening to me, and like, this is why I need this help. But then as I grew up into like university, I was like, there's only a certain amount of people I have to tell certain things to, and not everyone needs to know about every single detail about your arthritis. So just kind of moving on to like accommodations and university and just like school and work. Do you have any workplace accommodations or school accommodations? How did that go for you?
Yeah, so when I was diagnosed, I was 19, I believe. So I was just out of high school and I started my undergrad at York University. And fortunately, York was wonderful. Same with TMU with my accommodations. I think at York, because I was still quite sick at the time, um, I really advocated for my accommodation because I honestly, if you saw me, you could see that I was unwell to some degree. So they were incredibly accommodating with that, with my assignments and things like that. At first, I didn't want it because I felt like I don't have a disability. I just have like this disease. I'm not a disabled person. But by the point I was, stuck in a wheelchair for a little bit, I realized, okay, yeah, I need these accommodations. So I um I went ahead and did that. Unfortunately, it was really great. It was wonderful. In my master's degree, it was great. TMU itself was great with accommodations, and my disability accommodation counselor was also wonderful. However, the professors, I think this is just because I was in a master's degree, so it's a little bit less hands-on, weren't as entirely accommodating. I think it's because honestly, they were just so busy that they forgot, which students had what and things like that. So every once in a while, I had to give them a little reminder that I actually do have accommodations set in place, and then um, they responded more to that. Whereas at York, I found a lot more professors would, reach out to me about my accommodations and how we could plan around that. Um, so that fortunately was quite positive for the most part with school. With jobs, less so. Um, a lot of the time when I got hired initially, I wouldn't bring up my illness because I was scared of being fired for it. I didn't want people to know or make it seem as a disadvantage so they wouldn't hire me. And that's definitely a double-edged sword because then you always have to have the awkward conversation after you are hired to let them know, hey, I actually do have this, which can cause this and this and this to happen. Some days I'll be sick, things like that. Um, and that definitely caused some issues for me. I had bosses give me a hard time for that, thinking I was faking or taking time off because I don't know, just wanted to hang out at home, I guess. So that was definitely less helpful, a lot more stressful. I was still very sick for a long time after receiving my medication and treatment. So but I still had to work. I was in school, so I had to pay for my degree, and yeah, it was a really painful experience because a lot of a lot of my bosses didn't understand lupus, and they thought I looked fine. They didn't quite get it, um, and they'd give me a hard time for needing to sit down, or for leaning on the counter, or for asking to go to the bathroom if I already had a bathroom break, things like that. So I stopped working in kind of like customer service facing jobs. I would say at least a year and a half ago now. And since I've just moved into my full-time journalism career, and my experience there has been wonderful. All of my employers there have been incredibly accommodating. So I really just think I don't think either of them knew about lupus either, but I think they just respected me a little bit more, unfortunately, as bad as that sounds. Yeah, it does suck, but a lot of jobs, employers don't understand disability, or they just simply don't care. Kind of like an out of sight, out of mind thing. If you don't look disabled to them, they just don't understand what's happening. I had a prior boss think I was lying about getting a surgery, and I had to prove to him that I was in fact getting surgery by sending him a photo of me in my surgical bed. But even still, he thought I was lying, and he told everyone at the company I was working at that I was lying about having my gallbladder removed. So after that, I kind of was just like, you know what, I think I'm gonna quit this job. And yeah, I've definitely been standing up for myself a lot more since that time.
That's insane, like for someone to do
Hmm.
that. Wow, okay. But I think it's kind of good for people to know that that is the reality of living with a rheumatic disease. Like, although you get these workplace accommodations or school accommodations, like there will be struggles and it's never perfect. And I think it is somewhat getting better, but it's not the best it could be. Like I'm still having issues at school and university with teachers not believing me or being like, it's invisible, you don't deserve extra time. So I totally relate to you on that.
Yeah, I think people just because like you said it's invisible, people just assume that you can't handle it, or you have a low pain tolerance, when in fact it's usually quite the opposite because we've been in pain majority of our lives. Um, so that's definitely something that unfortunately is common. I do believe it's getting better. I think it's just education training. There's, people just assume if you're young that you're healthy, and we all know that's just not true. Just as it goes, if someone's older doesn't mean they're unhealthy. It's the same with young people. So over the last few years, I have noticed a little bit of an attitude shift, but I also think that's because people who are a little bit younger in demographic understand a little bit more, or try not to judge so much, compared to people who tend to be in that more of a mindset of, if you look fine, you are fine type of thing.
Yeah, and I think the whole raising awareness about invisible disabilities is also so important because not all disabilities are visible. And I think because of that, it makes it like 10 times harder for people to even acknowledge that you have a disability, which is really unfortunate. And I wish it wasn't like that, but that's unfortunately how society is. So I want to talk a little bit about if you're comfortable dating. So can you talk a little bit about if you've had any experiences dating while having a chronic condition, and if so, how did you navigate this?
When I was first sick, I was in a relationship. It was a high school relationship, and that was hard because I felt that I couldn't keep up with my friends and that group of people because I was sick. So, if they wanted to go out and stay out partying on a Saturday, I physically couldn't, like I was bedbound. And that definitely caused tensions in that relationship because this person just assumed that I was being lazy or not participating because I didn't want to, not because I was sick. It took some convincing on my part to, kind of prove to this person that I was unwell. So when that relationship ended, I felt very scared to date and step my foot in the dating pool again, because I wasn't necessarily scared of rejection, but I was scared of people not wanting to date a sick girl. Um, for me, did spend a lot of my time in bed because I was unwell. And I understand that, at 19, that's not entirely something that someone my age might find attractive. So for a long time, I didn't really tell people if I was going on dates that I had a disability or that I had lupus. It was something I would bring up only if we were going to be anything more than seeing each other casually. Um, and for me, that was a little hard because sometimes I couldn't hide that I was unwell. Say if I had a date on a specific day and I came in walking in with a bit of a limp, like that's something that's hard not to acknowledge, or if I had to cancel a date because I was unwell and then I had to cancel another date, but I actually did really want to go on a date with this person, it may come off as an excuse, but entirely it's because I am unwell and I don't want them to see me at that state. So for a while, it was something that I was nervous to bring up and talk about. It was only, I would say, 3 years ago that I started dating my current partner, and he's been nothing but supportive, and I've been really fortunate in that because um, I told him I actually did what I don't normally do, and I told him right from the get-go I was sick and I had an illness, and I totally understand if he didn't want to continue seeing me because if you're looking for a long-term partner and they have an illness that could potentially be passed down, that is something to consider. And he was totally kind and supportive of me no matter what. So I'm fortunate enough to have that experience, but I did have to kiss quite a few frogs to get there. But yeah, for me, it's been wonderful having him around because he is so supportive, and he doesn't fully totally understand it, but even now, if someone asks me about lupus, he'll answer for me because he knows I'm sick of answering questions sometimes. So it's really nice to have because he's a total support system, and sometimes he doesn't understand what's happening, but he's there for me anyway. And that's really nice. And it's definitely a huge drastic change from the first few relationships I had while dating with the illness, because it was just, people would say like, "Are you gonna die?" And I'd be like, "Well, we're all gonna die," and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, definitely day and night from when I was first diagnosed.
That's amazing. I'm glad you're able to find a really good support system now. I think support's so important when it comes to not just living with a chronic illness, but in general in life. Like everyone needs that
Yeah.
in their people. So I'm glad you were able to find people that are supportive. Can you talk a little bit about like lifestyle habits that you had to adapt after getting diagnosed with lupus, if any?
Yeah, I mean, so when I first was diagnosed, I wasn't like a very physically active person. I was more of like an artsy fartsy type of person. So I was always painting, reading, drawing, things like that. Unfortunately, after I was diagnosed, I had a lot of it was a lot more difficult for me to paint and draw because of the pain in my hands and in my joints. So I had to, I wouldn't say give up painting and drawing, but I had to really cut back on doing it. So I used to paint, weekly to maybe a couple times a year, and it's still at that point now, just because it does take quite a toll on my hands. They're a very sensitive part of my body. And I've actually taken up other, I've been trying to be more physical with my lifestyle now. So now that I've been at such a weak point in my life where I couldn't even pull my pants on, it's really important for me to stay strong. Even if that's lifting, 5 pound dumbbell for 20 minutes every other day at the gym. That's something I really pride myself on. It's important for me to feel strong. So I do have a pretty good regime when it comes to the gym. I try to set time at least every other day to do that. Even if I don't feel good that day, I'm just going to do a 15-minute walk on level 3 on the treadmill just to get my body moving. That's been the biggest lifestyle change. I've never been a big drinker, so for me, cutting out alcohol, it was pretty much non-existent in my life anyway, so that worked out. And I wasn't really someone who partied either. Um, I always was kind of someone that went to bed pretty early, so now I kind of feel like I have more of an excuse to be like, "Oh, guys, I've taken my meds; they're gonna knock me out now." Do an Irish goodbye type of thing. But yeah. So fortunately, that hasn't been the biggest lifestyle adjustment. Really, it's just been with painting and drawing, and that's only because my hands are so impacted to hold the pencil and like paintbrushes. Like it really hurts my hand. So I've just moved more to reading and writing now, which is fortunate because that doesn't require a whole lot of strength on my part.
So we kind of talked a little bit about you being a writer for Lupus Canada. Can you talk a little bit about
Mhm.
what your role is and what you do and what you've been writing about?
Yeah, so I volunteer with Lupus Canada and also Lupus Ontario. With Lupus Canada, I write there It's a monthly profile on someone in Canada who has lupus. It's called Let's Talk Lupus with Mackenzie, where they share with me their experiences, diagnosis, their kind of journey to where they are now. The whole experience has been wonderful. It has made me feel a lot closer to those in the community. We all share relatively very similar experiences when it comes to the journey of being diagnosed. Everyone's lupus kind of affects everyone differently. Nobody I've met has had the same type of symptoms as me. But it's been a wonderful and eye-opening experience. I've gotten wonderful feedback, and so has Lupus Canada, from readers. They feel a real sense of hope and community from the profiles, and that's been the biggest takeaway is you feel like no one's gonna read it, but then it turns out a lot of people do. A lot of people resonate with what other people in the community are going through, and that's been the biggest thing for me. Actually writing it isn't something that's difficult. I think the hardest part is just hearing someone open up and being so vulnerable. Because every time it's like not always a positive experience. But it's been really great, and I've only heard really positive things from people in the community. So I'm happy to do it, and I hope that it'll inspire more people to open up and kind of share their stories and write their own stories, post about it, write blogs or Substacks, things like that. Like even on TikTok, I know people post a lot about lupus on TikTok. So, or just autoimmune related, or any sort of disability really on TikTok. So things like that is awesome. I'm not as privy to TikTok just because I'm a little bit more shy to show my face on there. But yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity for people to connect.
Yeah, for sure. So I wanted to end off the podcast episode with an advice segment. So, what advice would you give to people who are the suffer in silence type?
I think that's most people, to be honest, with any sort of rheumatoid or as invisible disability or visible disability. The disabled community, I feel like, is one that is the suffer in silence type. Um, we're very strong people, and we do go through a lot of everyday inconveniences that people who are able-bodied just don't think of. And not to say that they're being ignorant. It's just if you're not used to, you don't know what you don't know, essentially. And when you do know it, you realize it sucks. So, um, I don't think suffering in silence is good for you. It might be something you feel that other people around you don't want to hear. And that's just not the case. When you open up to people in your community or who have similar experiences to your own, you'll realize that you share a lot in common, and there's someone you can go to when you're having a bad day. Um, I think giving yourself the chance to express how you feel, even if it's in a journal. Maybe you're not ready to come out and, tell everyone about your diagnosis, but um, don't hold back in feeling the way you do because you're only discouraging yourself from being able to heal and persevere through what's happening. Unfortunately, um, it's easy to remain silent and to kind of keep things back. But I just think that you're doing yourself a disservice. And at the end of the day, you live with yourself every day. So it's important to kind of prioritize your mental health and your feelings and talk about it. Even like I said, if it's just in a journal or on, some anonymous Reddit uh, post about disability.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie, for joining me on today's podcast episode. We talked about your lupus diagnosis and a little bit about your symptoms as well as medications. We talked about social life and living with lupus, and then workplace and school accommodations. We also talked about what you do in your free time and also the volunteering work that you do with Lupus Canada and Lupus Ontario. And last but not least, we talked about some things related to disabilities that will really help other people in the future. So everyone, like, comment, subscribe, check out Lupus Canada and Lupus Ontario's websites, which I will link down below. And I'll see everyone in 2 weeks on Take a Paycheck. Thank you, Mackenzie.
Thank you.